Mr. Pitts. It's a rather unfortunate name, Mr. Pitts. Where are you? Mr. Pitts, will you open your hymnal, page 542? Read the first stanza of the poem you find there.
The versions to make much of time?
Yes, that's the one. Somewhat appropriate, isn't it?
Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, old time is still a-flying, and this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying.
Thank you, Mr. Pitts. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. The Latin term for that sentiment is Carpe Diem. Now, who knows what that means? Carpe Diem. That seize the day. Very good, Mr. Meeks. Meeks. Another unusual name. Seize the day. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. Why does the writer use these lines?
Because he's in a hurry.
No. Ding! Thanks for playing anyway. Because we are food for worms, lads. Because believe it or not, each and every one of us in this room is one day going to stop breathing, turn cold, and die. I'd like you to step forward over here and peruse some of the faces from the past. You've walked past them many times. I don't think you've really looked at them. They're not that different from you, are they? Same haircuts, full of hormones, just like you. Invincible, just like you feel. The world is their oyster. They believe they're destined for great things, just like many of you. Their eyes are full of hope, just like you. Did they wait until it was too late to make from their lives even one iota of what they were capable? Because you see, gentlemen, these boys are now fertilizing daffodils. If you listen real close, you can hear them whisper their legacy to you. Go on, lean in. Listen. You hear it?
Well, good morning. Name that movie. Two people, that's awesome, great. You're like, dude, that wasn't Avengers, what are you talking about? Anyway, hey, we are so glad that you have joined us this morning. And we are going to be talking about Carpe Diem, seize the day, seize the opportunities that we have. And Scott mentioned it just a few minutes ago, as we have a wonderful opportunity this Thursday. You see, our community carnival is our outreach event of the year. Not our only one, but the biggest one we do. You see, this campus will be lit up. It'll be lots of fun. But the reason we do this is not just so we can have a bright fire truck and give away candy and make kids crazy. That's a bonus effect, really. But we do this to love on our community. And we do this to give a safe, family-friendly opportunity where people from the houses and the apartments and everyone we do life with that is around us can come here and we can learn and they can realize exactly what's on our shirt. You see, all our worship team, all our leaders you'll see throughout are wearing this shirt called #WeCare. And we have an opportunity on Thursday to do something great, but it's really the start of something we hope to do continually to go forward. Last week, I got to speak to some new people in our church after lunch and kind of share a little bit of the vision of our church. Is that we want to be a beacon of hope on 19th Avenue and Grover, is that it's not just be a dead, vacant building, but it'd be a lively, hopeful place. And the way we give that hope out is to tell people about Jesus, is to make Jesus known. But how do people won't even listen to us? Well, you see, this is our mantra we're going to be hearing a lot about. And when people come up to you when you're wearing these shirts, we're going to give it all of our volunteers on Thursday, 5:30. If you want you can serve for 2 hours, I'll give you a free t-shirt. Okay, that's the deal. Show up at 5:30 on Thursday and we'll put you to work. But we're going to be giving these shirts, and when people are going to ask you, what do you care about? Just be like, hey man, this is our church, and we care about you. We care about our community. And man, we just want to love you and partner alongside with you in this world that can often be really hard, can be really tough. But you got a God and a group of people who really care about you and love you. Well, today we're going to be talking about seizing. But you see, this concept isn't new. This concept actually can go back 3,000 years ago, as it did with Joshua. And we're going to learn about how did Joshua and the people of Israel seize a day. And I think from this, we're going to see some amazing leadership lessons. If you've been with us, I think we're in week 6 of this as we've gone and studied through this. We've seen some amazing things about leaders. Now, I want to pause here because I've said this before. If you hear that and you're like, well, I'm not a leader, so I'm going to stop listening right now. You are a leader somewhere in your life. Whether that's in your family, in your workplace, in your neighborhood, whether you're a good leader is a different story, but you are a leader somewhere. And from the life of Joshua, what we studied so far, that Joshua has shown us how to take over for leaders. He's shown us how leaders need to rely on God. The last couple weeks, we saw how do you overcome an obstacle, and then how do you memorialize and celebrate the victory of that obstacle. Well, today we come to another roadblock. We come to this next place where it's like, well, how do we seize this day? Because it seems a little bit crazy. Now, if you're catching on, I get a little bit of a spoiler alert here. Because they're going to seize the day, meaning they're going to do something great. We're going to talk about that in Joshua chapter 6, the story of Jericho. Now, if you have any sort of church background, maybe you're getting flashbacks of Sunday school right now, and you see like kids marching around to like a building or something like that, which if you see any kids out there, just don't worry about it. They're just trying something. But things worked out for Israel. But it's so much more than just marching around a city, which we're going to read about today. But it's about the opportunity that was in front of them. Now, sometimes opportunities look tough. For Joshua, it was a walled city. For guys in the Bible like David, it was a giant in front of him that he couldn't win a fist fight with. For Jesus in the New Testament, it was 5,000 hungry mouths. And maybe for you, it looks differently. Maybe it's an unexpected job loss. Maybe it's a medical issue that has popped up. There is something in your life that there might be an opportunity or an obstacle where we need to seize and we need to move forward from. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and open to Joshua chapter 6. And in Joshua chapter 6, we're going to really break down this passage this morning. And I'm so excited. And what we're going to see today is I want to just give you a couple of things. I want to give you 2 leadership lessons, as we've said, we've constantly seen through the life of Joshua. But then I also want to give you 1 life lesson. And if you don't hear anything this morning, I want you to kind of take away that endpoint of something you can just rely on and something you can fall back on, that God has something for you. Now, the first leadership lesson that we're going to see from here actually kind of harkens back a little bit. The first chapters before this is that leaders need to leverage past successes. What do I mean by that? Is leaders need to leverage past successes. Well, in chapters 3 and 4, before chapter 6 in Joshua, he actually comes up to the Jordan River. And the Jordan River is between them and this promised land that God has told them they're going to take. But you see, they got to this river at flood stage. It was a mile wide. Now, a mile of a river is really, really long. That's crazy talk right there. And then he said, we're going to cross it. And then they're like, Joshua, I don't know what you're smoking, but I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen. But God did his thing, little miracles happened, and boom, the river stopped flowing and stood up like a wall. And then they crossed on dry ground. And what's cool in chapter 6 is he's going to actually tell his people to move forward or to advance. And it's going to be the same exact word that Joshua used in chapters 3 and 4 when he talks about crossing the river. You see, they knew that they could do this. They knew that God would show up because God had showed up in their past. We look at stories like David in the Bible, the little shepherd boy who killed a giant. And we're like, man, that's crazy. Man, God intervened. But what we also learn is in David's past, he straight killed lions and bears with his bare hands. you guys seem so unimpressed. If a lion or bear comes towards me, I die, okay? I'm probably scared of a goat. I went to up to Dewey yesterday for a pumpkin patch, and some of those goats looked pretty mean. But lion or bear, I'm out, man. I'm out. He killed those with his bare hands. You see, he leveraged some of the past successes he had. And when we talk about Jesus, and we're going to dive into his little miracle a little bit later on, is he fed 5,000 people, but before that, he turned water into wine. And when it comes to our church, we're going to talk about this We Care initiative. We're going to talk about what is God going to do in the future of us captivating the imagination of our community. It's showing them we love and care about them. Well, we've been doing this. We didn't have a cool hashtag. But we have things like a food pantry. We do school outreach where we're partnering with our school hand in hand to reach our community. This is the third year we're doing the community carnival. And I say all this to point out that sometimes when we come against an obstacle, God is saying, look how I've shown up in the past. Look at the successes you've had. And that this obstacle may look big, it may look grand now, but you've had some battles that are getting you prepared for the war. But we also see, and this is the second leadership lesson, that leaders need to lean into counterintuitive approaches. Joshua chapter 6, verse 1, you're like, when's this guy going to read the Bible? Is he just going to ramble on for a while? All right, we're getting into the good stuff. Joshua 6, starting in verse 1, it says this. Now Jericho was strongly fortified because of the Israelites, no one leaving or entering. The Lord said to Joshua, look, I have handed Jericho, its king, and its best soldiers over to you. March around the city with all of the men of war, circling the city one time. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry 7 ram's horn trumpets in front of the ark. But on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times while the priests blow the trumpets. When there's a prolonged blast of the horn and you hear its sound, have all the troops give a mighty shout. Then the city wall will collapse and the troops will advance, each man straight ahead. You see, sometimes leaders need to lean into counterintuitive approaches, meaning things that don't come to the top of the mind. When Joshua saw this city, he probably didn't think, let's go march around it. And you see, a lot of times with these approaches, is the first thing we see is they're kind of contrary to human reason. I mean, think about this for a second. That this city, the city of Jericho, and it's hard to get exact numbers here, but many historians estimate it was probably in between 3,000 to 10,000 people that lived inside this little city. We just learned a few chapters before this, is Joshua had 40,000 men ready for war. I don't know what ready for war means. Like, they had swords, they were ready to go. They were just like, yeah, let's do it. 40,000 men as opposed to a city of 3,000 to 10,000. Joshua, if I was him, I was like, hey, we're going to make some Lord of the Rings orc ladders, and we're just going to swoop up over that wall, and we're going to dive in and then just take the city, and it's going to be cool. Or it also says in there in verse 1, it says that it was the problem for Jericho is it was strongly fortified because of the Israelites. You see, Israel had come in, they had taken the land around it. It says they were living off the land, meaning they were eating the food, the animals that were there. And they were essentially starving off Jericho. No more food coming in. And you see, in a walled city, that's kind of a problem when you don't have enough animals, you don't have enough crops, that eventually, if they just waited outside long enough, everyone inside would die, and then they'd be good. And they're like, all right, let's go take our city. But instead, God goes, hey, Joshua, I got this idea for you. You're going to march around the city. And you're like, what? He's like, oh, it gets better. The walls are going to fall down because you're going to blow some horns. I'd be like, God, what? This doesn't make me look cool. I'm Joshua. I'm supposed to be a warrior. We're supposed to slaughter some dudes, which is going to get into a second. And you're like, you're telling me I'm going to walk around a wall that's pretty long? We're going to get our cardio in, I guess. But and then we're going to blow horns? What in the world? It makes no sense. Why are we doing this? But Joshua shows us that not only are these counterintuitive responses contrary to human reason, but they're also conditioned on a heart response. Keep going in verse 6. It says this, so Joshua, son of Nun, summoned the priests, and he said to them, And then he went and he gave his message. And I'm not going to read all this right now, but I just love this, is there's no hesitation in Joshua's life. God tells him this crazy plan. God gives him this crazy solution, how he's going to seize the day, how he's going to carpe diem, how he's going to have this awesome moment. And instead of Joshua being like most of us and be like, hold up, God, that sounds crazy. I'm not doing that. Instead, Joshua gets all his best leaders around him and says, hey, guys, this is the plan. And he tells them exactly what God just told him. You see, Joshua here shows where his heart was at. He wasn't going to lean on his own strength, but he knew in his heart that he needed to trust God in this scenario. 2 Chronicles 16:9 says, for the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. And check out how this ends up. We see that this is also characterized by heavenly recognition. Pick up in verse 12. It says this, Joshua got up early the next morning. Now it says that a lot in Joshua, so if you sleep in late, I'm sorry, it kind of discriminates against you, but Joshua got work done early in the morning. So people are like, I never have time, just wake up earlier, or have a 2-year-old like I did, and then all of a sudden, like, I'm up all early every day. But anyway, Joshua got up early the next morning, verse 12, it says, the priest took the ark of the Lord, and the 7 priests carrying 7 trumpets marched in front of the ark of the Lord. While the trumpets were blowing, the armed men were in front of them, and the rear guard went behind the ark of the Lord. On the second day, they marched around the city once and returned to the camp, and they did this for 6 days. And it says, early on the 7th day, they started at dawn, and they marched around the city 7 times in the same way. That was the only day they marched around the city 7 times. And after the 7th time, the priests, they blew the trumpets, and Joshua said to the troops, shout, for the Lord has given you this city. And skip down to verse 20, it says, so the troops shouted, and the trumpets sounded. When they heard the blast of the trumpet, the troops gave a great shout, and the wall collapsed. The troops advanced into the city, each man straight ahead, and they captured the city. Now think about this for a second. This is the absolute miraculous happening. This wasn't something that men could do. They literally blew trumpets and shouted, and walls fell down. Let me help you visualize this a little bit. I got some pictures. The first one looks like I probably drew it myself. Can we get that one down low? Or a 5-year-old drew it. But I actually got it off of Google images when I searched Jericho ancient city. But this is kind of what it was like. You got your lower city wall, and then you got this big embankment, and then you got an upper city wall. So this was a legit fortified city. It wasn't something that was easy. Like Lord of the Rings probably had nothing on this. Like it was tough to get into this place. And then go to the next picture. This is kind of how big it kind of was. So there's a couple entrances, but that's where you got like cannons or something, I don't know. They got like the M16s like stationed on those ones right there. But that's where they're actually guarding, and it's a really small area, so even if you have 40,000 men, you're really losing the battle there because you're kind of not using your full strength. So this is what they're up against. And you see, the crazy make no sense plan that God lays out for them actually works. And he tells them to march around. He tells them to do this, and then the miraculous happens. And here's what's so cool about that, because like I said, they could have maybe found a way to take the city. They could have starved them off and then broke in when they're all dead. But instead, God puts his signature on it. You see, it would have taken years for them to pull every single brick down. It would have taken time for them to come in and destroy that outer wall like what actually happened. Instead, God's like, I'll do what's going to take you 10 years with 1 million people. I'll do in 2 seconds, and you'll blow a trumpet, and boom, the walls are coming down. You see, just like in here, that it was going to take so much time. It was going to take so much work to do, but God did what they can't. He marked it with his imprint. I was thinking about this the other day, and I was like, man, think of how long it takes us with heavy equipment for construction. And by the way, I don't know if like every city in the Metro Phoenix area between like Peoria, Phoenix, Surprise, Glendale, if they all agreed that we're going to have construction over our entire city and like right now, does anyone? Like the 101, the I-10, the 303, everything's 17, everything's in construction. But I think about all that work that's happening and all our modern technology, and God blew that away in 10 seconds. You see, this is what is so amazing about this story we see here in Joshua. This wasn't done in a way that we can replicate, but it was done in a miraculous way. And when we look at the other stories we mentioned throughout Scripture, and David and Goliath, a little shepherd boy hitting a giant in the head with a slingshot and a rock and actually killing a man that an entire nation was scared of, is miraculous. When we talk about Jesus taking a few fish, two pieces of fish and loaves, and turning it and feeding 5,000 people when there was no catering company or Chick-fil-A on call at that time, sources confirm, but Jesus blows them away. It was the miraculous happening. And when I think about our church, a tiny little church on 19th Avenue in Growers, how we can impact and be hope and light in a community that so needs to hear that you're not doing this alone, but you have a God that loves you. When that happens, when this place is filled with people who care and love on those who are hurting, it's not going to be saying like, hey, Andrew's a really smart guy, because we know that's not true. Or I was hoping you laugh at that. The fact that you didn't laugh makes me concerned. I need to work on my jokes. Oh, that one hurts a little bit. I'm going to get over that. But we're going to know that God stepped in and God intervenes. You see, Joshua's life leads us to this one life lesson. That, man, we can seize the day. We can take an opportunity. When God puts opportunities in front of us, we need to seize it. We need to be all in. And indeed, they did this. But check out verse 21. I think this is important because there's a caveat we have to have here. In verse 21, it says this: they completely destroyed everything in the city with the sword, every man and woman, both young and old, and every ox, sheep, and donkey. Now, we got to trust God. We got to know God's going to do the miraculous. But sometimes there's things in our life that we don't quite understand either. And I'm sure when you read this, it probably doesn't sit well with you. Because if you heard me say that, everyone in that city was destroyed. Man, woman, and child. We're not talking about Avengers here. They're not killing make-believe aliens. But this is real people in real history in vast amounts of death. Well, let me give you the life lesson for today. And we're going to wrestle through this a little bit. And it's this, that in life, we need to leave the battle to the Lord. In life, we need to leave the battle to the Lord. Let's back up a few verses before Joshua commanded this in verse 21. It says in verse 17, he says this: but the city and everything in it are set apart to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and everyone with her in the house will live, because she hid the messengers we sent. But keep yourselves from the things set apart, or you will be set apart for destruction. If you take any of these things, you will be set apart, the camp of Israel, for destruction, and make trouble for it. For all the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are dedicated to the Lord and must go into the Lord's treasury. You see, what we find out here is this wasn't simply an Israelite conquest for the sake of military expansion, for showing their power over another nation. But rather, this was a story that was part of the grand narrative of what God would do in redeeming history. We read this and we wrestle with this and they say this is hard. But you see, God was preserving his people who he would bring Jesus Christ through in the New Testament. And this was all just a step inside that. Now we still read that and be like, man, I don't know if I like Old Testament God. Old Testament God is way more impatient in judgment, and it's really scary. Like, where's the Jesus God who just loves everyone, and it's great, but this destructive God, I don't know how I feel about that. Well, we also got to see kind of the full story. That Jericho was not just a simply nice, happy community of people. This was a very wicked nation as well. That one with a savage government, a religion that believed in child sacrifice and numerous other practices that we would consider way outdated and savage. But then God also didn't make this decision rashly. He foretold of this in Genesis 400 years prior to this, and nothing with Jericho changed. 2 Peter 3:9 says, the Lord does not delay his promise, as some understand delay, but he's patient with you, not wanting any to perish, but all to come to repentance. Here's the deal. No matter what's going on here, it probably won't sit well with us in 2019 that they didn't just kill men, but they killed everyone in the city. But I think we need to also see in this full story that there are some things we can't understand this side of heaven, but we also need to see that in wrath, God remembers mercy. Check out verse 22. It says, Joshua said to the two men who had scouted the land, go to the prostitute's house and bring this is Rahab, who we were introduced, and bring the women out of there and all who were with her, just as you swore to her. Verse 23, so the young men who had scouted went in and brought out Rahab and her father, her mother, her brothers, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her whole family and settled them outside the camp of Israel. They burned the city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. Verse 25, however, Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, her father's family, and all who belonged to her, because she hid the messengers Joshua had sent to spy on Jericho. And she lives in Israel today. You see, God is not just some mean judge, death-bringing guy in the sky, zapping and annihilating people every wrong turn. The opportunity for grace and mercy was obviously there, because a former prostitute, the last person that we'd ever expect, was the one who jumped on it. And as we said a few weeks ago, she actually becomes part of the genealogy of Christ. Her name is listed in Jesus in his family line. But I also want to say that we don't know the extent to the mercy here. That we don't know who else God saved in this city. That we don't, this is a kind of a side note, and I feel like we have to wrestle with it because we have to talk about it, that you're like, well, kids died in there. Well, I believe that there is somewhat of an age of accountability that the Bible talks about. What that looks like, I don't know. But when abortion happens in our world, when death at childbearing happens at our world, and things that are just sad, and because we live in a sinful world happens, what happens to those babies? What happens to those lives? Well, in Pastor Andrew's personal take, I believe that God shows grace and mercy in those situations. The Bible doesn't give us a definitive answer, and that's something we can ask him on the other side of heaven. But I want us to see that this seems harsh, this seems crazy, this conquest, but that God is so loving, and God still shows mercy here. And just as Joshua follows God's will, just as Rahab was spared, we have a saying here at Cross Church that the goal of our church is to make it harder for people in our zip code to die and go to hell. At the end of the day, the reason we exist as a church is because we believe in a God who, if we follow him and we love him, will spend eternity with him. And if we don't, the latter is not so nice. That they can spend eternity in hellfire separated from God, or they can spend an eternity with God and with our Creator and Father. And this morning, when we talk about how we're going to seize the day, how we're going to be like Joshua and seize an opportunity for us, I want to extend to you, which path are you going to go? Are you going to be like Rahab the prostitute, who, even though she lived in a dark time, in a wicked place, she had a hard life, who knows what her life was before God, but she gave it up and she followed him. And she experienced the mercy and the grace of a loving God who does not tolerate sin, but who still forgives us and has grace even when we've messed up. And maybe for the first time today, you need to take that step. Maybe you need to say, I'm done trying to do this on my own. I want to follow this guy you call Jesus. I want to learn more about him. I want to learn what that life looks like. And I'm tired of trying to do this on my own. I don't want to spend an eternity separated from him. But I want to live a true life of what it means to be part of this community and part of this God who he talks about care and talks about love. If that's you this morning, there's a number ahead of me, 94000. Text I said yes. And you can meet us in that corner. We want to pray with you. We want to follow up with you. But maybe you're like the Israelites and you're like Joshua. And you're wondering what God has for you in your life. You're wondering, what is your next step? What is Carpe Diem, Latin, seizing the day, whatever that means? What is he asking you to do? And I invite you, a great opportunity is to join us this Thursday in our carnival, but more than that is being part of this movement on 19th Avenue Grovers to show that we care about making Jesus known to the world around us. Let's pray.